everyone, and welcome to episode 76 of the Retrospectives podcast, Street Fighter 2. My name is Patrick Arthur, and I'm joined, as always, by my co-host, James Sterlings. James, it's taken us 76 episodes, but we're finally doing a multiplayer game, or at least a multiplayer competitive game. How does it feel?
Feels pretty good, actually. We have to deviate from our usual format of not talking about the game at all until recording, but it's been kind of fun to jam out games over the past couple of weeks with you and some of the members of our community.
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun, because on this podcast it's normally a very solitary pursuit, and what James and I try to do is not discuss things at all with one another so that we can have a very fresh discussion on the show for you guys. But for this, when we're playing against one another constantly, we couldn't be sitting there in silence. There had to be lots of trash talk. So as a consequence, we've actually been doing a lot of discussing over the past couple of weeks, which is particularly good for me because I'm obviously very new to this genre. But yeah, I just wanted to give a big shout out to everyone who played some games with us in Discord. It was a lot of fun, and I enjoyed having a slightly more varied range of matchups than James just, beating me to the ground time after time after time.
This is your second fighting game, right? You played Fantasy Strike before, and that's like a training wheels game, right?
Exactly, yeah. And so it was certainly a very interesting experience for me. And for what it's worth, I think Street Fighter 2 was the correct game to do. It was a decent step up. So yeah, it was fun. It was fun to do this multiplayer game, and it worked better than I expected.
Yeah, I imagine we'll do some more multiplayer games in the future, considering how well this worked.
Yeah, there's some people who want to do. There's a person who wants to do 1v1 StarCraft games. I'm not sure. I'm not sure that's actually going to happen, but he can keep his hopes up, and we'll see what happens.
Yeah.
For those who've never listened to us before, James and I make up the Retrospectives podcast. Each and every fortnight, we play classic games of the past from start to finish, or in the case of Street Fighter 2, we just play it a lot. And then we deliver a verdict on whether these games have truly stood the test of time. The critical thing about our show is that this is not a nostalgia podcast. We're not here to evaluate these games in the context in which they were produced. We play these games today, and we evaluate them by modern standards. So I think the first thing for us to talk about, James, is the extent of our experience with the fighting game genre. Because for me, at least, this was a very unusual experience. I've played a lot of games over my life, and I would say that I've played games of most genres, and it's given me a base to draw from when I'm discussing and talking about these video games. But for me, with fighting games, I'm almost completely new to them. I've always been aware of them in the periphery of my vision, but it's never something I even just played casually with friends. So James, I know you're at a very different spot to me. So tell me about your full experience with fighting games, and then I'll tell everyone about my measly experience with them.
Yeah, so I've played a lot of fighting games, but mostly casually. So I will, buy a fighting game when it comes out if it looks cool. And then I will jam games with friends, mostly people who either I live with or come visit until somebody salts out and we never play it again. I feel like I've played most of the releases over the past 5 or 10 years. My very first experience with fighters was Street Fighter 4. I played just before Ultra came out, and then I played that. Most recently, I've been playing Guilty Gear Strive online. And before that, I've played a bunch of Soul Calibur games, Mortal Kombat, DBZ Fighter, and a whole bunch of games. I've played a lot of them, but I wouldn't say I'd played any of them particularly extensively.
It's kind of what I've always done with FPS games. New Call of Duty comes out, I'll get it and play it for a while. New Battlefield comes out, I'll play it for a while. It's not that I'm diehard, fanatic for these games, but it's fun to play the new thing, right?
Yeah, I agree. And I just kind of enjoy them generally. I think, to be honest, most of the time I stop playing a game is usually because I no longer have anyone to play with because they get bored of it. But yeah, with a lot of the newer games coming out with much better netcode, I think I'll be playing more of them moving forward.
And you're telling me most recently you've played lots of Guilty Gear, right?
Yeah, I've been playing lots of Guilty Gear since it came out, just jamming games, after work, during work sometimes. Yeah, I reached floor 10 as the highest. I never got to Celestial floor in Australia, but I'm pretty sure the Celestial floor in Oceania is bugged anyway, and there's no one in there, even if you make it. But I'm not super good at it, but I do enjoy it quite a bit.
See, for me, it's the opposite. So basically, I am so inexperienced with the fighting game genre that James and I had to prepare for this episode. We both thought that if I went into Street Fighter 2 with zero experience, that it would not be good because it would be too much to take in. So our friends recommended this game called Fantasy Strike to us. So I don't be surprised if you've never heard of it, because whenever I've mentioned it to anyone, they get blank looks. But it's essentially a modern Street Fighter clone, but for babies, with all of the complexity of inputs stripped from the game to make it as simple to control as possible. For some examples of that, there's no high and low blocks. There's no combo inputs. It's all just directional buttons plus attacks. And I would say move lists are drastically reduced from even something like Street Fighter 2. So each character will have something like 10 moves and no more. And that's variations on a move. Like 3 different fireball speeds is 3 different moves.
Yeah, specials are on a single button. Even supers are on a single button. To counter grabs, you simply let go of every button at once, and if you guess right, you counter it, and if not, you get hit. But Fantasy Strike is extremely simple, and we played that on and off for the past few months in order to get Pat to, a place where he could jump into Street Fighter 2 and not feel like he had to spend the whole 2 weeks just learning to control his character.
Yeah, and it taught me a lot of the basic concepts of it, like this is an anti-air, this is spacing, this is a grappling type character, things that people take for granted. It was kind of like a safe space for me to get my head around some of the concepts. And I think that for what it is, Fantasy Strike gets a lot of criticism. Like, it's the kind of game that has a score of 70 on Steam reviews. Like, it's not very positive. But if you're brand spanking new to the fighting game genre, I genuinely think it's the best place to start. And I know this isn't a Fantasy Strike review episode. I'm just saying that it's important that I frame for you guys just how new to the genre I am, so that you understand where I'm coming from when I talk about what I think about Street Fighter 2.
I mean, I think it's good to have 2 perspectives. So Street Fighter 2 has a lot of different versions, right, Pat?
Yeah, it's a very confusing lineage. I'm not going to get into the full history of it here because that would be the whole episode. But I'll just give some very basic details, and then I'll tell you how we played it this fortnight. So the very first version of Street Fighter 2 released in arcades in 1991. So it was originally an arcade game. It was developed by Capcom. The first version that we actually tried was an emulated version of Street Fighter 2 Turbo, which was released for Super Nintendo in 1993. But the version we settled on pretty quickly was Super Street Fighter 2 X Champion Edition, which is the Japanese arcade cabinet version of Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo, released in 1994. That's a bunch of words that a lot of you probably won't understand. The important thing is that we played on the latest definitive version of the game. So there's people who argue which version is better, but we played the most updated, modern version of Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo, and the one with the most active community. We went with this version for 2 reasons. Like I said, the way we were playing it, the active community was engaged with this version, whereas the Street Fighter 2 Turbo had literally no other players. And the other reason is that it just looked and felt better from our point of view. We just tried them both out and we preferred that version.
Yeah, and so we played Street Fighter 2 this fortnight on Fightcade, which is a program you can run on your computer that will emulate a bunch of, different consoles or arcade cabinets, depending on what game you're playing. But most importantly, it allows any game run through it to run with rollback netcodes, so you can play online with anyone with basically no issues. Like Pat and I played it on shitty Australian internet over the past 2 weeks, and I barely noticed a stutter. And it's got all sorts of lobby features allowing you to quickly get into matches with people all around the world. I thought it was pretty great. It was really easy to get set up and running. And I basically had no issues with it over the last fortnight.
Yeah, completely agree. It was very easy. We were able to play against people from Europe and the United States with basically no lag, or if there was lag, I wasn't able to detect it. It was just a very smooth experience. Everything worked brilliantly, which is amazing for a multiplayer emulator. And it's just a very cool thing. If you can play these classic retro fighting games online, you're not stuck with the modern releases. So I was delighted that we managed to find a way to do this. And we got to play against people outside of James and I, just being in the same location.
Yeah, it had a pretty active community, it seemed. There was on a Friday night, there was 200-300 people online at any given time, which is pretty cool. So yeah, if you're interested in playing an older game, even if it's not, Street Fighter 2, like we're talking about today, I'd definitely recommend Fightcade if you haven't tried it already.
Completely agree. Fightcade is great. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm just going to try and explain Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo to those who aren't super familiar with it. And I know that sounds ridiculous to the people who are seasoned fighting game vets, but right on my very first episode, I made an incorrect assumption with Doom that everyone would know what Doom was. I didn't explain it at all, and I'm never going to make that mistake again. Everyone has holes in their gaming knowledge, so let's do this. So, Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo starts with each of you selecting a character. There are 16 characters and one hidden cheaty character that's banned everywhere, so effectively 16 characters to choose from. You get into the game and it's a 2D side-on fighter. So there are some fighting games that are three-dimensional like Tekken, where you can change the plane that you're on. But with this, it's just 2D and it's all cartoon drawn. So you're always on a single plane. The idea is that you need to knock your opponent to 0 health. And when you do, the round is over and you move to the next round. It's best of 3 or first to 2 wins because double knockouts are possible. And when you've won your 2 rounds, the other player gets kicked back to the character selection screen while the person who's won stays on with the character they won with. And this is a relic of the fact that this is an emulated version of an arcade machine. So if you were playing at the local arcade, the winner would get to continue playing on as the character they were playing until they lost. But, because we're emulating it, we can put in infinite coins and just play again and again and again, and we certainly did do that. Rounds are 99 seconds long, or 60 to 70 seconds is more accurate for the speed we were playing on. We were playing on Turbo 2, whereas Turbo 3 is the competitive mode and Turbo 1 is the default. Turbo 1 was just a little too slow and Turbo 3 was a bit too quick for amateurs such as James and I. But I think that with fighting game experience, you could definitely get into it. You could immediately start on Turbo 3 if you wanted to play at the competitive speed. The way you control Street Fighter 2 is that you have your 4 movement keys, left, right, up, and down, and then you have 6 attack buttons. You've got a light kick, a medium kick, and a heavy kick, a light punch, a medium punch, and a hard punch. Those are your basic attacks. Some of them can be modified by holding down a button while executing the attack. And there's also crouching and jumping modifications of those attacks. Not every character has a wide array of modifications to their attacks. Some do, and some they've all got different modifications of those attacks on different buttons. So it's not like every single character has 136 possible moves in every single combination. You just have to figure out what unique attacks that your character has. Like, for example, Dalsim, he's a character with very long limbs. He's got different attacks if he's holding the back key versus his neutral attacks because of the extreme range of his attacks. He needed something to kind of help him when he was trapped in close range. In addition to the regular attacks, there are also specials and supers. So specials and supers are activated in the same way. They're just various degrees of difficulty. So your special attacks are basically you have to hit keys in a specific sequence with a specific rhythm and timing. The most simple of these would be something like the Hadouken or the charge attacks. A Hadouken is down, right, or down whatever direction your opponent is and then attack. Whereas a charge attack is hold back and then press forward and attack. And if you mistime these, then nothing will happen. If you time them correctly, you'll get a special attack that's different from your regular attacks. It'll either do more damage, it will move you across the screen a lot. They're unique moves that are far more than just punches or kicks. Finally, you have supers, which are also precise moves that you have to do, where you have to type things in specific rhythms, but they're usually a lot more complicated, and the strings to get them could be 5 or 6 keys long. You also have to charge up your super. You can't do it whenever, and usually you'll get about 1 super bar charged per game, and I struggle to imagine how you could ever get 2. A super is just a super powerful move that can do a shitload of damage if every hit lands. Whew. So James, that's the absolute bare bones basic of what Street Fighter 2 is about. You're fighting them, you're using a bunch of different moves. Where would you like to start our discussion?
Well, how about we start talking about the characters we jumped in with, because I think that kind of informs a lot of the way we feel about the game and how we played it. With you being a newer player, I mostly swapped characters a lot. That was kind of how I felt would be fair to you, like if I just changed characters. And in some ways it's harder because you have to adapt more often, but I also have to learn my character from scratch each time. Although the characters I settled on mostly were the Boxer and Blanca. Initially I liked doing the motion inputs more than the holding back and then forward for charge attacks. But as I played, I got more used to it and I found them pretty, simple and straightforward to play.
Can you tell me what you think of the character roster overall? Because once again, the problem is I'm coming from a background of not really having many points of comparison here. And from my point of view, I thought the character roster was fantastically varied. And I don't know if this is normal for fighting games, but it really felt like most characters had a very unique niche and identity, and their game plans were different, and their styles were different. Even like the different characters in the same broad genre, like the Rush characters or whatever, felt very different in how they actually played. And it wasn't easy for me to just switch from character to character because of how different they all seemed.
Yeah, so I think I broadly agree with you. I think the character roster in the version of Street Fighter 2 that we played is pretty good. For me personally, I've played a lot of newer games. There is, Street Fighter 2 does have this issue where there are a number of clone characters, like Ryu and Ken is the classic example.
Mm-hmm.
They obviously play differently in practice, but they are quite similar. And there's shared things between a bunch of the characters, and I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing because it allows you to change from characters a bit more easily. But compared to some modern fighters, the variety isn't up there with the best of the best. But over this past 2 weeks, I played a whole bunch of different characters, from your Fireball, Dragon Punching Shoto characters, to grapplers like Zangief, T-Hawk, even Blanca when I started abusing the grab a lot on that character against you. So if you want to jump into this game, you have a lot of options at your disposal.
Yeah, well, for me, it seemed I agree with you that Ryo and Ken definitely feel the same. I mean, and I guess that's just a matter of how they are. But even something like Blanca and E Honda, which both have a very similar charge, I would not say those characters play similarly at all.
No, not at all.
Yeah, so while there are specific moves that might be the same, it doesn't matter if the context surrounding those characters is different.
Yeah.
And, there are so many knobs on which you can tweak these characters' strengths and weaknesses that just giving a character the same move will produce a completely unique result for the character overall.
So yeah, I mean, we've seen this a lot over the past decade with multiplayer games having these huge rosters of characters that cater to all different types of playstyles. People love this kind of thing. I love this kind of thing, you know, because it means you can always play with your friends, right? There's always something for them and there's something for you. So you settled on, like, you started on Ryu because in Fantasy Strike you played Grave, because you liked the kind of mid-range playstyle, right? The fact that you could change, you know, how aggressive or defensive you were being based on your matchup.
I love it. And I think that that's just naturally what I gravitate to with these games. I think that there's a few aspects of this character I really like. Like, I like that he's got a fireball that has 3 different movement speeds. So it feels like you can trick your opponent or control the spacing with those 3 different fireball speeds. It's a small thing, but I felt like I had much better control over what was going on. And in general, yes, I think that one of the things I really like about fighting games is being able to change up the terms of engagement. When you're the offensive character, I feel like you've got to be on the offensive all the time. When you're the defensive character, you're defending all the time. And the reason for that is that your tools are so geared towards defending or attacking that it makes sense to be pushing on that axis. But it can end up, you know, leaving you predictable and exploitable. With a more mid-range based character, with the freedom to switch up aggressive and defensiveness almost at will, you're keeping your opponent guessing a lot more. And, you know, the thing I really enjoy about these fighting games is doing something my opponent doesn't anticipate. And that's what the mid-range game is all about.
Yeah, I'd say that's one of the things I like about fighters as well, because in a given matchup, right, so say I play Patrick 100 games in a row, what'll generally happen is for the first like 5 games, we'll both start, you know, with a strategy, and then one of us will, you know, one of our strategies will be superior to the other. So then I'll beat Patrick like 5 games in a row, and then Patrick will evaluate, you know, what my game plan is, and then he'll figure out what moves he can use to beat most of the ones that I'm doing, and then he'll win 5 games in a row or something like that. There's this back and forth evolution that happens over the 100 games or so that you play. And you know, when you play a character like Ryu, that can change the matchup dramatically. Like it's almost like you flow back and forth in order to try and keep that one step ahead of your opponent.
But I had a problem, James, because I was playing Ryu first, but it ended up becoming an exercise in frustration, and I wasn't having a good time. And the reason for this were the special inputs. So I said before that you have 6 punches, 6 keys, and a bunch of movement keys that can modify your attacks. I was okay with all of that. Now, I was making a lot of mistakes, like constantly. I was pressing the wrong key. To some degree, I was spamming a little bit, where I was just jumping in and pressing whatever kick or punch. I was getting abused by low kicks, etc., etc. But I kind of took that as part of the game. You know, it's like, this is difficult for me. There's a lot of keys, but I have to learn this, and I have to learn, I have to press the right key at the right time. What I wasn't getting along with was the special inputs. So the most basic move that Ryu can learn is his Hadouken, down right punch. And, you know, you've got your 3 punches, so there are 3 modifications of that attack which go at different speeds. And I would say when I started playing, I was probably hitting it about 30% of the time. And Hadouken isn't just some niche thing that Ryu can do. It encompasses a very large part of the strategy of the character. If you can't consistently do Hadoukens, then you're really not playing the character as they're intended to be played. It's pretty important that you can do Hadoukens more than 30% of the time. So at this point, James, I got very frustrated. I'm like, fuck this character, fuck specials, and I changed over to Dalsim.
Because you could use his, because Dalsim's a character where his arms kind of like stretch out when you press the button. So you have these like mid-range attacks that are a single button press, and you kind of leaned into that, right?
Yeah, and Dalsim has a fireball as well on the exact same input, but it's not as essential to his identity as a character. And so I was better able to play the character with my atrocious special inputs.
And you got better at that, right? Like near, today we played for like 2 hours or something, and you probably hit them like 90% of the time, right?
Yeah, I think 90% is pretty close, and I also started dabbling in the other movements. So those were the two characters I played the most, and over the 10 to 15 hours I've played it, I've gotten better at those basic inputs, but I've still got a long way to go, man.
Absolutely. I mean, to be honest, I think the input requirements in Street Fighter 2 are quite strict compared to like modern games. For example, with Ryu's Shoryuken or Dragon Punch, it's like a Z motion with the analog stick or the key presses. And I loaded up Street Fighter 5 yesterday just to see, and I reckon I could Shoryuken 1,000 times out of 1,000 if I tried to, pretty easily in that game. Whereas in Street Fighter 2, I reckon I could do it like 600 out of 1,000 times. It's a lot stricter than modern fighting games. You have to do exact inputs. There are no shortcuts. There's no like leniency like in modern fighters. If you kind of get it slightly wrong, it'll just let you do it anyway. You have to have the exact motion or it will not come out. And Patrick and I had a lot of discussions about this over the last 2 weeks, and our discussion evolved somewhat. So we're going to try and summarize this long discussion, because it originally started with special inputs, should they be in fighting games, and it went from there, right?
I was getting pretty mad and pretty salty because, like I said, the previous game I came from, Fantasy Strike, did not have inputs like this. It just didn't. The most complicated it got was you hold a button and do an attack, which is just a normal attack in Street Fighter. So I have literally never done anything that resembles these inputs. And I was getting furious because it felt like the game was giving me a middle finger. And it's like, well, I know you want to play the game, but unfortunately, because you haven't sat down and you haven't grinded out pressing these buttons over and over, you're not allowed to play. So I was getting mad in Discord. Everyone was telling me I was wrong and so on and so forth. But that did change.
Because we all remember being at that point that you are, right? Like when I played Street Fighter 4, it was a struggle for me to Shoryuken on demand. I had to, sit in training mode and do it like 20 times on the left without making a mistake, 20 times on the right without making a mistake. Like every time before I started playing with my friends or something like that, until I could do it, naturally. And since then I've played a lot of games, and a lot of these games, they share these inputs. So kind of when you get, competent at doing them in one game, that skill kind of transfers between games, thankfully. But, on this topic, I will say that I think Street Fighter 2's inputs lean on the side of being too precise, especially for new players. Newer games, I think, are a lot more fair in this regard. I think if we had started you playing like the modern Street Fighter games, you'd be able to do it a lot easier, because even towards the end of the 2 weeks, you were not getting those dragon punches, right?
The thing is, in order to get those dragon punches, I would have had to gone into a lobby and practiced it, and I had no interest in doing that. I just don't want to sit there endlessly practicing an input, and I think that this is where I've landed on them, because been lots of discussion and thinking about it. These inputs are fun and enjoyable once you know how to do them, because I have to admit, being completely honest, once I could do the Hadouken, and once I've been playing around with the backward spinning kick, which is a reverse Hadouken, it is extremely satisfying to do it. Like, it just is. It's a very tactile, enjoyable feel to be nailing these combos, right? Where I think the problem lies is entirely in the fact that the process of learning these inputs is miserable. Like, the thing about these fighting games is that it isn't a turn-based game. It isn't a slow game. It is extremely fast. Extremely fast. A lot of the time, what you're doing is you're anticipating what your opponent is doing and reacting to it. But this Shoryuken, this Dragon Punch move, it has to be done instantly. Like, you got to snap it off at exactly the right point, just as you would with a regular button press. But if you don't know the input or you can't do it precisely, it's essentially useless. If it takes me 2 seconds to do this input, or it takes me 1 second to do this input, it may as well not fucking exist. And that is the problem as a new player. It's incredibly hostile as a learning experience, and it makes me just not want to engage with it. Once you can do it, fantastic. It's fine and it's fun and enjoyable. But learning it is a complete other thing.
It's almost like a hazing ritual in a way. Like
Yeah.
when you're going through it, it's miserable. But like everyone that I talk to that has gone through this and is now comfortable with it, like defends it to the death, even though they can't.
Yeah.
And I don't think we can come up with a good argument in favor of why. Most people can't come up with a really solid argument as to why the game should have these. It's simply, for the most part, I believe, because we went through all that pain. And are now proud that we accomplished that. So, every time we do accomplish it, it feels good, right?
Well, like I said, I get that it's fun to do. And I'm not it's funny because I'm not even arguing against their inclusion anymore because I get it now. I get that it's fun to do those inputs. I'm just saying that the fact of the matter is there is a hostility to new players embedded in these special inputs. And I think that it's a big reason why the genre has struggled to attract new players. Like it seems like it's a very close-knit community. It's because of these inputs. They're just too hard, and the process of learning them is not fun.
Yeah.
I just think it was awful, and to this day after playing, I still don't do shurikens because I just don't want to sit there in place grinding out learning the input.
Street Fighter 2 also doesn't really give you the tools to practice. Like, there's no training room because this is obviously emulating an arcade cabinet. Like a newer game would have, a training dummy that you can program, and it would show you your inputs on screen, so you could really dig in and figure out exactly what you're doing wrong. There's none of that here, which I think hurts the learning process a bit for a new player. And it's interesting to me because I wonder, like, if you're two new players, because I'm an experienced player and you're a brand new player. Is it less frustrating when you're two brand new players both struggling? Because then
Well, no, because there's certain inputs which you just don't do. That's the problem, James. It's that there's no using the shuriken half effectively. Like you can't be like, well, I kind of know it, because the game's too fast to let you kind of knowing it work. So you either learn it, you need to learn it to a level of proficiency that demands practice. You can't learn on the job.
Yeah.
And the thing about the Hadouken is it's kind of like a long range move, so you can get away with whiffing it sometimes. The shuriken does not work like that. I've been spending this entire 2 weeks trying to think of an analogy for this, and I can't really think of one. The best that James and I could come up with is rocket jumping, but you can still rocket jump up a ledge, like without anyone fighting you. Like you can rocket jump around the map, and that's an effective use of the rocket jumping skill. Let alone, doing it in full-blown combat. Even something like Dota requires some kind of precise movements. I was thinking of Sand King, Blink Dagger, Ultimate Stun, James?
Yeah.
So you have to be in cover, blink in, Q your ult, blink in, stun, which is several key presses. But the thing is, if you're a bad player of Sand King, you can still go alt and blink in.
Yeah.
Or you can still go alt stun, without a blink dagger. There is a learning curve intrinsic to the game. It doesn't make you do it all at once. So I really think that these inputs are a thing unique to fighting games, and I think that there's really nothing else like it.
Yeah, I think the main thing that stands out to me is that to you, it's about the argument feels like it's about whether it has them or it doesn't. To me, it's more of a question of leniency and where the difficulty should be. So something that's, I think, separates a game like Street Fighter and Fantasy Strike from other games in the fighting game genre is very heavy focus on the neutral game. Now, if you don't play a lot of fighting games, neutral is basically when both characters are on even ground, and neither has advantage on the other, and neither really has gotten a hit in yet, basically. There's this part of the game where you're kind of playing, tiptoeing around each other, throwing out like long range attacks, non committal quick attacks, and trying to get the first hit in. And Street Fighter, we're not very good at the game. So we're not like, near the end of the game, I was figuring out block strings and combos and stuff like that. You weren't doing that. But when we.
No, I had literally never was trying to do a combo.
Yeah, so basically the way our games went on the first few days was like we're, moving back and forth, jumping at each other, blocking each other's hits. And it's basically like a series of rock, paper, scissors where we each get one hit on the other person, then go back to playing the footsies game of trying to get the one hit in. And it's just a back and forth of who is better at getting those hits in, right? Street Fighter has a very heavy focus on that kind of thing, in my opinion. There's lots of like single hits. Maybe, if you know a combo, there'll be 3 hits, maybe 4 at the most is how I feel about it. In other fighting games, you can have like 10 to 20 strings, like something... I don't know if you weren't really doing it, but I was doing it near the end, is block strings. So
what? Sorry, can you just explain what a block string is?
Yeah, so basically I'll do like a series of hits against you while you're blocking. And the idea is, it'll be like 5 hits long. Basically, there comes a time where I have to stop attacking for like a full second. And after I finished attacking, you can start attacking, right? I guess so when you're new to the games, block strings are kind of like, you don't really know when my string of attacks is going to end. You can just guess.
You just feel it out.
Yeah, you just feel it out. But if you don't know, right, like if I'm attacking you while you're blocking, and you think, I don't know how long this is going to last for, so I'm just going to block forever, then I can stop and just walk up and grab you, right?
Oh, I see. So it's a way to... Right, okay, I understand.
Yeah, so like for beginners, when I'm doing a block string on you, it's quite likely that you'll get antsy and press a punch button and then take a hit, because my attacks are already coming out and you're suffering from block. Like when you get hit while blocking, there's like a bit of a delay before you can act. So you'll probably get hit if you try to act before I'm finished. But then later on, it's more about, conditioning your opponent to block a lot, so then you can grab them in a lot of cases. So in Street Fighter, basically, there isn't very long block strings. There's like 2 hits, 3 hits, maybe. And in, other fighting games, you kind of like take turns, and it's more about execution. Like, I'll do my 30 hit combo on you, and then it's your turn to do like a 28 combo on me. And then
that sounds so bad.
And then because
it just sounds miserable.
Yeah. So Street Fighter's very like neutral focus game where there's a lot of trying to get little hits in. So what I'm trying to get at basically, Street Fighter 2 puts all of its execution barrier. It's like front loaded, right? To play the game, you need to have good execution on your special attacks. And there's not a lot, like once you've mastered special attacks like the Shoryuken and stuff, it feels like that's the hardest part of the execution battle, because I found like once I could do them consistently, like if I figured out a combo, it was really easy for me to do combos consistently, where in other games I feel like doing the special inputs is the easy part. Doing a very basic combo, is like easy to moderately difficult, and then doing like a super optimal combo is hard, and that's where the difficulty is. So like if I do like a standard bread and butter combo on you, it'll do like, let's say 50 damage, but if I go out of my way and learn the harder input one, I'll do like 60. I get a bit more bang for my buck if I put in the extra, but I don't get a lot out of it.
See, what you're explaining, James, is actually, it sounds even worse, because I'm going to be honest, I don't love the idea of combos in this game, or complicated combos. It sounds to me like I get one hit in and then I convert it to 1/3 of your health bar because I've memorized the algorithm.
Mm.
Like, is that something you enjoy in fighting games? Because to me, that's almost simplifying the game down to 3 exchanges. Whereas the way we were playing, a match would have 15 to 20 exchanges because you could block. Someone starts attacking you, you block correctly, then you hit them back. So it's a far more involved back and forth over the course of a match instead of 3 exchanges, game over.
I think a good fighting game still has that. My real point that I'm trying to get at here is that you can play the character fully, even, with a basic level of execution, right? You can do the basic combo easily enough, and that gets you like 90% of the way to playing the character. Whereas here, it took you like 2 weeks and you couldn't do a Shoryuken. You can't even take advantage of your character's core moveset. That's what I mean, right? Like,
yeah, it is worth noting I didn't try. Like, I tried for a little while.
You tried
and
for
then
like an hour.
I did,
like,
but
solidly.
that was also very early on where I was only hitting Hadoukens 50% of the time. Like, I am confident that if I had continued to train at the Shoryuken, that I would have been able to do them. Because one of the things I did notice as I was doing these special moves is that I feel like the Hadouken is almost like a stepping stone to learning the Shoryuken, because there's a particular rhythm you need to hit to execute moves. And I think that once I'd learned the rhythm of the Hadouken, for example, I could transition to the backwards kick much easier than when I was trying to do it by itself. So I think that if I had the mental will to actually continue practicing it, I would have got it. But it's just, I find that grinding away at it so uninteresting, and I didn't want to just be sitting there in a lobby doing it over and over until I could use it in the game. The part of the game I enjoyed was playing the game, and I wanted to learn while playing.
Yeah.
But the game demanded that I learn this while not playing the game, so I didn't.
Yeah, you asked me that now, and I remember like a week ago you asked me, like, do you enjoy sitting there in training mode practicing like the Hadouken? And I just like laughed, because that's not... Because people sit in training mode like practicing like 30 move combos, right? Like, there are people who love these games just to do that. But like just doing the Hadouken, that's not that satisfying, right? Like...
Yeah, I can't imagine, like, honestly, James, this idea of combos, like, it makes me physically ill. Like, I don't mind, like, the 2 to 3 hit combos in Street Fighter because it feels more, because it doesn't, like, end the game, but I just don't want to memorize an algorithm, which is what it sounds like. It sounds like this converts into this, and this converts into this, and you're just hitting the buttons in a precise way, and you can do it every single time once you've learned it. That's not the part of the game. That's not the part of fighting games that's interesting. It's everything that leads up to that point. So why wouldn't you make the game more about the mind games that lead up to the point than your ability to hit 30 buttons in a row?
Yeah, because different people like different things, right? That's what it comes down to.
Well, and some people are wrong and some people are right. Like, if you enjoy hitting 30 buttons in a row, I mean, like, good for you, but you're wrong. That's not what's fun about fighting games. And so with that, it's time for our totally not retroactively added to the episode music break. This is Guile's theme. I think this is the most iconic piece of Street Fighter 2 music, and it's far better than James's selection later on. Enjoy.
one thing that you did like about Street Fighter 2 compared to Fantasy Strike is that in Fantasy Strike, moves feel extremely like rock, paper, scissors. Like one move will basically always be, move A always beats move B always beats move C. But when we transitioned you over to Street Fighter, you kind of noticed that it's not that black and white, right? Like different moves have different uses at different ranges and timings and that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the games with a good combo systems have them be a bit more reactive than, like I kind of agree with you when you just memorize a string and do it the same every single time. It's a bit boring. Sometimes combos can be, affected by distance and ranges and timings, just like normal moves can. And in that case, it's more like you need to learn your character's moveset well and in what situations a move will link into another move. Because it's not always, this move will always link into this move. It's like this will happen under, specific circumstances, and you need to train yourself to recognize those circumstances. And to me, that's when combos are fun, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the problem is I've never really learned combos.
Yeah.
So honestly, this entire time we played, there was never a time when I was ever trying to hit a combo. Not once.
You definitely would. There was this time where you were landing normal hits into Hadouken pretty consistently.
Oh, okay, sure. Is that a combo?
Well, basically, like it's a very short, simple one, but it's basically the same thing.
Okay, well, I wasn't trying to do a combo. I was trying to push you back.
Sure.
Because if I was jumping in and attacking, I noticed the Hadouken had a pushback. So I figured that if I've attacked you, you're still blocking, I can use the Hadouken to make more space. I wasn't trying to chain damage together. I was just trying to have I was just trying to do the next attack, I guess, is a better way to put it.
Yeah, because like Ryu's like basic one is you jump in with a medium kick and then you do crouching low into Hadouken. That's super simple.
I swear to God, James, never did that intentionally. What I'm trying to get at is like all that stuff is less interesting to me than the back and forth anticipating what the other guy is doing and then doing the thing that counters it. But sorry. I'm getting carried away. We were talking about how there's more delineation between the moves in Street Fighter, and I completely agree with you compared to Fantasy Strike. Having light punch, medium punch, heavy punch, light kick, medium kick, heavy kick, all the different jumping versions of it, all the different low versions of it, and then a couple of other not special moves, but moves like the overhead punch that Ryu has.
Yep.
All of that, it felt like I had a lot more options and tools to use in specific scenarios. And I really, really liked that because there's nothing feels better than selecting the correct moment to do your standing heavy kick. Like, it's great. It's not a move you use very often, but selecting the right moment to do it feels great. And yeah, completely agree. So Street Fighter 2 isn't like fantastically complex. It was like a good step up in complexity compared to Fantasy Strike. And I enjoyed the step up in terms of just the more mechanical options that opened up and the bigger move list that opened up to me and trying to find the right move to use in the right spot.
Yeah, I noticed you mentioned it a few times while we were playing, but Fantasy Strike only has like blocking on holding backwards, because in fighting games you block by holding backwards usually. So if someone jumps over you, you're suddenly holding forward and you're no longer blocking. And we enjoyed that about Fantasy Strike. You liked the jump up to high and low blocking, right?
Yeah, no, it was great. I liked that low blocking blocked everything except overheaders and jumping attacks, and I liked that regular blocking was vulnerable to low attacks. Like, I know this sounds like such a simple thing, but I felt like that little change compared to Fantasy Strike actually added an enormous amount of depth to the gameplay and trying to counter what the other guy was doing. And the fact that jumping was vulnerable to anti-air attacks added, another layer of complexity, because you could bait someone into doing a jumping attack and then counter it when you were low blocking and so on and so forth. So it's a little change, but that's the sort of stuff I like. Like I like that a lot. These games should be, I mean, for me, what I like about these games is the whole, you're kind of standing there staring at one another and anything can happen and you have to just try and read your opponent and make the right decision.
Yeah, we played a lot of the game, I'd say. So you did mention that you really like the mind game aspect of it. Like, did you feel you grew as a player in this aspect? Did you have specific things you learnt, in this way that was more possible in Street Fighter 2? Or was it more of an instinctual thing?
Oh, I mean, I think I definitely grew as a fighting game player over the course of the 2 weeks we played.
Yeah.
And I think that really it's a lot of it is just being able to switch up your offense and defense. Like and this is one of the reasons I like these mid-range characters like Ryu. Like we played a bit of the Ryu versus Zangief matchup, which is probably pretty one-sided for Ryu, and I'd played him a lot, and James is new to Zangief, etc., etc. But what I liked about it is the default of the matchup is Ryu is trying to keep Zangief away, right? Ryu has a projectile, Ryu's faster, Zangief is very, very dangerous in close range. But because both players understand that's the dynamic of the matchup, well-timed aggression can completely catch the other player off guard. And I think that is really that concept, like it's a simple one, but it's very enjoyable. It's the same with everything. Like if someone's jumping a lot to close the gap, then you should start doing anti-airs. But then they can James can bait that by conditioning me into thinking that he's going to jump, and then he does a sidestep or a low kick or a jumping kick or whatever it is. There's enough tools available to trick the other player, and you can always trick the other player and always find an answer for what they're doing.
Yeah, one of the things I liked learning, and this seems so obvious to me now that it was pointed out to me, but when you do Hadouken, the motion is like down, down, forward, forward. So at the start, you always crouch. So what kind of happens, and you're kind of conditioned this way from playing video games, but generally you'll throw Hadoukens with a set timing, and then when you think your opponent's going to try and jump over it or use an ability to get through them, you just tap crouch, and that triggers the reaction from your opponent to jump, and then you get them. And, I had this argument with someone else, whether the motion inputs add like a layer of strategy to the game. And I think in this case, there's a very clear argument that you can use the ducking motion to feint your opponent. And I really enjoy that aspect of it. I did it a couple times to Pat.
Did you?
Yeah, I did a couple times.
Wait, okay, so I literally never. That's too high level for me, James. You give me too much credit. I'm not. I didn't read into those feints.
Well, maybe you were just
too complicated a concept. Like, I'm not saying you didn't boom me. I'm just saying that I think that motion input thing is something that a higher level player would notice, because I was just. I wasn't going, oh, he's going into a crouch, it's a Hadouken, let me act in this way. Just saying.
I mean, maybe you just memorized the timing to when I was throwing them and jumped.
That's probably it, yeah.
Yeah, but that works
I'm just
too,
saying
right?
it's a cool concept. I'm not dismissing it. I'm just trying to be honest about my experience.
So for Street Fighter 2 specifically, so you played Ryu, and you also played Dalsim, and then today you tried Sagat for a little while. Did you like how many moves all the characters had? Did you think it was enough? Was it a lot? Was it too little? Because Street Fighter 2, when I compare Street Fighter 2 to modern games, it's a very simple game. It's not Fantasy Strike simple, but it doesn't have a ton of like additional mechanics, because I feel like the fighting game community has kind of evolved with the genre, and like, to bring people back, newer games, add stuff on top of what's already there. How did you feel like complexity wise about Street Fighter 2?
Like, it was simple, but it was the right level of complexity for me. Like, just once again to illustrate how new I am to these games, I would often hit punch instead of kick. Like, I did that. You know, I would hit the wrong button. It happened all the time. It's happening less the more I played, but it was a common thing, particularly with Dalsim. Dalsim is a character that got very long limbs, and it's very important that you press the right kick and the right punch because you got to zone them out with those punches and kicks. I fucked that up non-stop. But I actually, like I said, that's just the learning experience, and I think I was completely fine with learning that. You've shown me Guilty Gear and all of the different mechanics that are in that game, and it would have been if you said, "Hey Pat, try Guilty Gear, they've designed this one for new players," I would tell you to fuck off because it's way too hard. There's so much going on. Street Fighter 2 as a second game to learn after Fantasy Strike in terms of complexity was bang on the money. So
yeah,
it was a good suggestion.
Yeah, and for me, like, I'd say, I don't know how much, like, obviously when I play a given character, I'm nowhere near coming close to, you know, hitting the skill ceiling of the character, right? Like, I'm so far away from that, it's not funny. But I still feel like when I play a character like 30 times in a row, I get a bit bored quickly, whereas I feel like in other games, when I play the character like 200 times in a row, I don't get bored, because I think newer games have much bigger move sets and more options available to you, so it kind of feels like there's a, you know, that because there's lots to learn, I can learn every aspect. I can learn, like, you know, every aspect of that character to 20% of the total proficiency, right? And that makes me, you know, as like a fairly casual player, makes me feel, you know, good. Like there's a constant, you know, progression. Whereas in Street Fighter 2, I get up to like 30% pretty quickly, and then I feel like to get the rest of the way, I have to put a lot of effort in, like spend time in practice modes and practice combos against a training dummy, maybe, or like really study certain matchups. So I guess for me, the complexity is a bit on the low side. I just like when there's lots of stuffs, because something I really like about more complex fighters is that if I play against, you know, the same character but 10 different players, you know, each player might play that character differently. Whereas, you know, it's probably still true for Street Fighter 2, but I feel like the variety in people's playstyles probably won't be as high.
And I think this is like a very critical difference between people with experience with these games and those who don't have experience with them. Because the reason I played basically two characters, and, you know, I dabbled with a few others, but I mainly played two characters, is because the game was hard enough without me also having to learn all the different punches and kicks. Like, whereas James and another one of our friends and people would jump in and they'd be like, "Oh, what are the special moves?" And they go, "Okay, this, and this." And within 5 to 10 minutes, they're like, "Okay, I know the special moves," and then they'd start using them. That's fucking insane. Like, as a new player, that is crazy that someone could just sit there and pick it up. And I can understand why James got bored faster, because he could just learn those moves. Whereas for me, I have so much to learn with Ryu and Dalsim too. So it was, once again, as a new player, it was the right level of complexity, but it was also the right level of, I guess, boredom aversion, because I could not be switching characters at the pace that James was.
Bored is too strong a word. Like, no, at no time when playing this game did I feel I was bored of playing the character. I just thought, like, not even that. It's just like I felt like if there was more, if my character had like 3-4 times as many options, I would be having more fun. But I didn't get bored, because obviously Street Fighter 2 is a game, you know, that people can play for thousands of hours and still enjoy, right? Like there's a lot of stuff. It's got a high degree a skill requirement to go all the way. So, you know, like theoretically I could play one character forever and still be constantly getting better. It's just, I guess, like as a casual player, There's not a lot of exciting things to do for a long, you know what I mean? Like, if I was super into Street Fighter 2 and I tried to play it like competitively and like took it seriously, I don't think I would have this problem because the game has a lot of depth to it. But, as a more casual player, it doesn't have all of these, flashy things and heaps of things to mess around with.
I see.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So this is more of a criticism from like, a casual point of view, not a criticism of the game in a competitive sense, I guess.
Yeah, because one of the things I was thinking about when we were playing this game is that in fighting games, every single attack from the most basic to the most complex has a wide range of attributes that determine how strong it is and the correct context to use it in. They've got different range, they've got different speed, both on startup and recovery. They do different stun values. If it's a jumping attack, it's like how many landing frames are there, what's the size of the hurt box, what's the direction of the hurt box, when does this attack have priority over other attacks, does it have iframes? And all that applies to literally every single attack from your basic starting punch to the most complicated one. So because the game has so many possible iterations for every single attack, that just gives a game like this, even though it's simple on the surface, enormous depth.
Yeah.
Like absurd depth compared to, I would say, most games. Like, I can't, when you think of like a gun in Counter-Strike has less attributes and less things defining that than a medium punch in Street Fighter. And I don't think that's an exaggeration.
You're right. It's not a game with 100 mechanics, but the mechanics it does have a lot of depth to them. I have to give it that.
One of the things that surprised me, James, playing this game, just in general, was it felt polished in a way that's actually extremely rare, I think, for games of this age. And I was thinking, we played Super Mario World. We both really enjoyed Super Mario World. Great game. But I wouldn't really call Super Mario World like a polished, tight video game. We kept referring to it as a theme park of ideas, right? It would keep throwing new, fun, cool concepts at you for a level, and then it would do the next thing. But it was a very loosely designed experience compared to modern platformers like Celeste or Hollow Knight or even something like Super Meat Boy. Street Fighter 2 is not like that. Street Fighter 2 seems like it was designed with modern design principles. Like, everything is so deliberately encoded in this game, down to, like I said, the stun value on specific attacks. Did you feel this way, or did it feel like an amateurish, old-fashioned job?
I wonder, because Street Fighter 2, Grandmaster Challenge that we played, is like the umpteenth release of the game, so it is like the most polished version of Street Fighter 2. But I do agree with you, like, everything feels tight and with purpose, like, for the most part. Like, there are some things that feel a bit janky, like we noticed today when I was playing Boxer that I was so sure that the turnaround punch was projectile invulnerable, and I was just getting the timing wrong. But actually, in Super 2 Turbo, they took that property off the move because he has other ways to deal with it. I thought that felt a bit weird. There were a couple of, little quibbles here and there that made it, but for the most part, I feel like the game is really well designed. Like, all of the characters have tools at their disposals to deal with the other types of characters, right? Like,
yeah, you never really feel completely helpless, and I certainly didn't. Like, there were times where I was getting beat down, but I didn't feel like it was the game's fault. I felt it was my fault. It's like, I just don't know the correct response, or I'm not executing the correct response. And I think that was interesting. At no point during the game was I like, the game is bullshit. It was, I need to figure this shit out. And sometimes it took a long time, but I was almost always able to figure it out.
Sometimes we were a bit wondering how the grab priority the grab priority was working. Like I feel like
Yeah.
a lot of times we were trying to grab each other at the same time, and then it wouldn't like clash or tech the throw. Just someone would win outright, and we'd be a bit confused. But like other than that, everything feels really tight. I feel like all the characters are kind of like designed with each other in mind. Heaps of characters have a bunch of different tools to deal with projectiles, for example. And, most characters have more than one tool to deal with, a given situation. And these tools are better or worse in certain situations, depending on what's going on. Which gave a lot of play to the game. I felt like there was a lot of room to use things in novel ways, and I think obviously when you're not good at the game like we are, there's a lot bigger room for experimentation. Like something we noticed when we were watching good players play online is that basically people never jump ever, because it's super dangerous, because you'll just get dragon punched.
That's Street Fighter 3, isn't it?
When I was watching, people were jumping very rarely.
Okay, I saw plenty of jumping.
Okay.
I don't know what the games I watched. I mean, obviously jumping has a lot of danger to it, but I think that in this game jumping's pretty damn common. So I disagree. I think jumping is a thing that happens a lot in this game, from what I've seen.
They weren't jumping as much as we were, that's for sure.
Yeah, that's fair. I think you and I were not nearly as good at executing the various Yeah, we weren't as good at punishing them. So in fact, I would say we often tried to punish by jumping into the other character and attacking midair, which probably isn't the way to do it.
It's funny, right? Like it's funny because when you're like, what I was getting at is when you're new to the game, it's like more strategies are possible because the other person won't punish it as consistently.
Yeah, but if you overdo it, the other person is forced to counter it. And I love that about these fighting games. There's a narrative to them. Over the course of you playing games with someone, the story of the game changes and how you're fighting changes over the course of a game. And that's very satisfying to track as you both begin to understand how the other person is playing. And often it's something as simple as you'll use a move early, it'll get countered, you won't use it for 15 rounds, and then you'll bust it out again. Like that shit like that happens all the time. Or at least it does for me.
All right, so we're up to about an hour and 10, so we'll go for our second music break, and we totally didn't forget the first one and retroactively edited one in afterwards. We definitely didn't do that. So we'll have our totally second music break now. Now, this is funny because I remember when I first booted up Street Fighter 2 Turbo and Fightcade deafened me with its max volume that I turned it off immediately.
No, James. That's the Patrick strategy.
That is the Patrick strategy. And then only today did I remember to go back and listen to the music.
Oh, yeah, you've been playing with no music. That's tragic.
I don't think I've been playing with no music. I think it's just been on a very low volume. Like, loud enough to hear characters yell their attacks, but not enough to... Also, we do talk while playing a lot, so it is hard to pay attention. Which is sad, because when I went back and I listened to the OST today, I found a lot of tracks that I really liked. So what I'll do is I'll share with you one of the songs that I thought was good today. My favorite track was Zangief's theme. Patrick, I think you disagree with me. I thought it was really good. There's a couple versions of the soundtrack depending on what console you're listening on, but we're going to go with the version that we were playing on, the one from Grandmaster Challenge. So this is Zangief's theme. That was Zangief's theme, or the theme that plays in the Russian level. Patrick, what did you think about the music?
Overall, I liked it. There were some tracks I thought were fantastic. I thought most of them were good, and there were some where I was a bit whatever about them. So the three that really stood out, I thought, were Cammy's theme, Fei Long's theme, and Guile's theme. Guile's theme to me is like, and I'm sure it's the same with most people, is the most iconic piece of Street Fighter 2 music. I didn't even realize this was Guile's theme. I just knew it as an iconic piece of music that I must have heard 100 times before. So when I heard it, I was like, hey, I know this song. And then the ones where I was a bit lower on were Dalsim, E Honda, and Boxer's theme. I think that the good tracks are outstanding and overall the music's good, but there are a few that I just am not a big fan of. I just kind of average, ignorable, and unfortunately Zangief's is one of them. I don't like actively hate it or anything, I just think it's unremarkable.
I'd say that to me, more important than the music is like the sound design. I think all the characters, pretty often will yell out the name of their attacks, which I kind of thought it kind of helps you to have discussions about the game when you're playing. Like when you're playing, against Ryu for the first time and he throws out his Hadouken, you can ask your opponent, how do I, beat the Hadouken? Because you know the name of it because they yell it out. And totally not because you looked up the name of the moves online. Definitely not. But I kind of liked all the sound cues. I thought all the sound effect hits were pretty good. I really liked getting those big meaty hits off with Boxer on your characters.
And his yelling out as he lunges in.
Yeah, yelling out, and the sound of Blanca chomping on Dalsim's neck. Happened many times.
God damn it. Can we listen? I know we're talking about music. Can we talk about Blanca for a second?
It was so funny. So we looked up a tier list a while ago, and we saw that Blanca was very consistently like at the bottom.
Yeah,
of
15th
the
or
tier
16th.
lists.
Like
and Patrick was maining Dalsim at this point, and he was firmly in number 1. And then me and Patrick are playing Dalsim versus Blanca, and Patrick really struggled to ever get a win.
In general, Blanca, I just really couldn't deal with that character. I got okay with it, but even when I thought I was doing okay, James was still winning three out of every 4. Like, I think that every other character, James, I was fine against. Like, maybe you'd be slightly favored against me, but when you were on Blanca, I was fucked. Like, I just had no recourse, and I really tried, but I couldn't figure that character out. I will say, once again, I don't think it's the game's fault. Like, I just wasn't good enough. I do think that's a matchup where knowing the Shoryuken would have helped me a lot, though. I think if I knew that move, I'd be in much better shape in that matchup.
Yeah, or even like consistently doing the yoga flame, the big fire.
Yeah,
exactly.
Front of you. Yeah. So I think I was held back, but even knowing those specials, I still think he would have continued to crush me. And that was my sob story. Luckily, James took pity on me, and he swapped off Blanca so I would have a chance, and the matchups would remain somewhat competitive.
Well, that was the problem, wasn't it? Because in this version of the game, you can't swap characters until you lose. So we had this running joke where I was like trapped in this like perpetual plane of this one character because I
do. Sorry, I know we're just continuing the discussion on, but I think this is an interesting thing as well. So I tried Blanca for a little bit as well, and from memory, I was crushing you with Blanca as well. Like when we were first trying to play him, I got a bunch of wins on a character that I'd never played before, and I was very confused. I do think that the floor for playing these aggressive characters that just hit a bunch of inputs is quite low. Like, I think that it's quite easy to play these characters when there's 2 new players, because it can be very difficult to deal with the unbridled aggression. And I actually hated the feeling of playing this character because I felt compelled to be aggressive because that's where the character's strengths lied, but my brain couldn't keep up with the aggression I was giving. So I was button mashing. And I was still effective button mashing, but I hated the feeling of it, so I stopped playing it.
Yeah, button mashing is effective in its own way, right? It makes you unpredictable. And even like, a brand new player can sometimes win button mashing against a skilled player
Yeah,
just
and
because you're so unpredictable.
just so I'm clear, I'm not saying you were button mashing in our matches. Clearly, you were playing deliberately. But as a new player, it was interesting. I felt I didn't want to play a whole class of characters because my brain at that point was not quick enough to keep up with the actions I was taking. When I was playing more defensive reactive characters, I felt like I could be a lot more deliberate, and I felt like I was doing a better job of learning how to play. So yeah, that is just an interesting observation.
Yeah, I mean, when I first started fighters, I also, very strongly um, gravitated towards these like zoning type characters. And when I say zoning, I mean like spamming projectiles
Hmm.
to the best of my ability. Just because it's a very straightforward game plan that, other new players have to deal with more. And it's a lot easier for you to do that than to deal with the. Like, I understand why you went that route. So did you end up enjoying Dalsim or Ryu more in the end? Because those are the two characters you played.
I think that in the end, I was seeing more success with Ryu. It was remarkable going from Dalsim, who moves so slowly, to Ryu, who actually can move around the battlefield
Mm.
decently quick. I think I like the idea of Dalsim more. Like, I think that I like Dalsim's moveset, but he ended up being quite challenging. Like one of his stronger anti-airs was harder for me to execute, and it's important that you hit your like it was sorry, it wasn't difficult, I was just struggling with it. And you have to think about Dalsim is you've got to use the right attack when they're coming at you at the right angle. It's like this kick when they're coming at this angle is a good kick. If you use that kick at the wrong angle, you take damage. Ryu didn't feel like I needed to be quite that perfect, and it was much easier for me to switch up to aggression. Also, much easier to retreat. With Dalsim, you would often get me trapped in a corner, and I had no fucking idea what to do. With Ryu, it felt much easier to escape that predicament. And I think that when I started doing that spinning kick, I felt a lot stronger. Like I felt like I'd gained a tool like a movement tool that I didn't have before, and suddenly I was very mobile, and I
Yeah.
felt very powerful. So
Yeah.
in the end, it was Ryu, but I think that if I were to keep playing this, I would prefer to be a good Dalsim than a good Ryu.
I mean, he is just the best character.
Well, he's up the top. Certainly one of the strongest. It's hard, right? Like there are Street Fighter 2 tournaments, but they're few and far between, and I can't imagine they've got a very big prize pool nowadays. So
It is funny you bring up that topic of characters you felt bad playing. I kind of, at the start of the 2 weeks, I played E Honda a bit, but I really discovered that. So, E Honda has very polarizing matchups. Basically, if the character you're playing against has a like projectile, then you're going to struggle, and if they don't have a projectile, then you're going to crush them. And on balance, like against the whole cast, he's like 50-50, I think. But it's more like against specific characters, he's like either 80% or 20% to win.
And I played projectile characters.
Yeah, although usually when I got to you, you died pretty quickly. But I found that kind of unsatisfying to play because it felt more like whether I won or lost was less about, me and more about, what the matchup was. I didn't really like that. I much preferred when all the matchups felt 50-50 and it was purely on me, because I'm happy to lose if I feel like it's my fault, which is, well, I mean, it's obviously always my fault when I lose.
I felt like the character you played the most was Boxer.
Yeah, I did play him a lot, and I enjoyed him for the most part. I had this love-hate relationship where I kept trying to learn to charge up the turnaround punch, which he's got this move that if you hold down 3 kicks or 3 punches, he charges up this attack. So what you do is at the beginning of the round you hold the 3 buttons, and then sometime later you let go of the 3 buttons and he'll do a punch, and this can do you can almost one hit somebody if you charge it up for like the full 99 seconds and then get it off. But I found that my gameplay was a lot worse when I was like holding the buttons down, and it was very frustrating when I'd like go to do it and you'd just jab me or jump away from it.
I got pretty good at dodging it, I think.
Yeah, yeah. I just gave up and just started relying on the good old headbutt, which projectile invulnerable, some iframes, was very good at getting closer to you or punishing anything that you did. And I actually, near the end, I found it really satisfying to combo his charge dashes out of just a regular attack. So, like, you jump in with a heavy punch, and, like, as you jump, because he's a charge character, you have to hold backwards for, like, a second to charge up a move. So, you jump forwards, then quickly switch to holding backwards, land a jumping punch, land, do a crouching punch, and then immediately press forward and punch to do a dash punch. And whenever I did that against you, it felt really good.
Yeah, see, whereas my whole game plan was attack, get one or two attacks in, then run away. I felt like one of the things I liked about I enjoyed that matchup the most. I felt like it was probably the most balanced of all the time we spent playing. Was when I started realizing you were spending a lot of time kind of sitting still blocking while charging. And I'm like, wait a second. And I started running in and doing grabs and running in and doing overheads. And the matchup evolved from there. So I thought it was an interesting matchup. Had a different dynamic to the other ones where you were kind of like creeping closer, and you had always had this potential to like do a lot of damage while I was just trying to slowly chip away at you.
Yeah, and yeah, I guess the thing with the Dalsim matchup, which is cool, is that like because your attacks, it's like your hand stretches halfway across the screen because you're like, I don't know, you're like Mr. Fantastic. You've got
Inspector Gadget.
rubber limbs, yeah, Luffy from One Piece. So while you can hit me from half the screen away. If I punch your limb, you'll actually take damage, is something that I noticed. So you could like jump over your arm as it shot under me and then do like a jab downwards that would hit you, that kind of thing. And it was about figuring out like, if I think you're going to do a certain move to counter my advancing towards you, what move can I use to stuff that? So there was a lot of back and forth. I really enjoyed that.
Yeah, the fact that you could punch me from long ranges, but if I could interrupt it with a fireball, it would counter it, was very interesting because you were always on the verge of punching me, but I was always on the verge of fireballing you. So yeah, it was a cool matchup. I enjoyed it a lot.
Yeah, so I mostly played near the end Boxer and Blanca. Although I will say, like, although I enjoyed playing those two and I enjoyed Ryu, I still don't think that I love any of the characters in this game. Like, I don't, daydream about playing any of the characters when I'm not playing Street Fighter 2. When I played, like, Street Fighter 4, like, I really liked playing Makoto. Yeah, and when I played Soul Calibur 6, I really liked playing Xiongmina. But when I play Street Fighter 2, I feel like I just moderately like all the characters. Like, there's some I really didn't like playing. Like, I was getting so mad when I was trying to play Zangief against you today.
Yeah, it was nice to be on the other side of the beatdown, I've got to say. Normally it's you crushing me, but I was able to tear you to shreds. That felt good.
Yeah, I don't know what it was. I just could not get his moves off consistently. It was funny because I remember, like, when I played a few of my other friends, I got them to download Street Fighter 2 and play, and they were all like, wow, I really can't show you can either. It's really hard in this game. Or I couldn't do, like, the 360 motion very well in this game. But yeah, that was the matchup, Zangief versus Ryu, where I was the one feeling frustrated with the controls. But yeah, I wouldn't say love playing any of the characters in this game. I just merely liked most of them.
It does make sense. I mean, if you consider Street Fighter 2 to be one of the granddaddies of the fighting genre, what we've probably seen here is a lot of the prototypes or like I don't know what you're saying, like the basic molds of characters. So there's no characters in these games that are really outside the box. They're all, I mean, these probably formed the basic model for what kinds of characters should be. Like Ryu probably established what a mid-range character was, and Zangief probably established what a grappler was. So I
Yeah,
can see
absolutely.
with all your experience with more modern, sophisticated games that none of them would seem super special.
Yeah, but that's a good thing in its own way, right? Like, for a new player, getting these character archetypes in their purest form is a valuable experience.
Yeah, I think so. So I like you. I wasn't like there are characters like Invoker in Dota 2. I love that character to pieces. Like really, really enjoy it. There's no character here where I feel that strongly. So I kind of get the wavelength you're on.
Yeah, but I'd say they're enjoyable for the
Yes.
most part. Like,
Yeah.
all of the characters are enjoyable. Even like whenever I did land a pile driver on you as Zangief, that was really satisfying.
Yeah,
When
those
I wasn't
those
being...
those 2 times in 30 minutes were very
Yeah.
satisfying.
Shut up. It was definitely more than twice.
Maybe
But
3 times if I'm being generous.
okay. Yeah. But all of the characters, I think, at the baseline are fun. Not super fun, but enjoyable. So I guess we're kind of getting to the heart of the matter now, Patrick. So for me, I find fighting games like very enjoyable. Like if I will just play one for like 2 or 3 hours at a time if I can. Like if I have nothing stopping me, I'll just keep playing them, even if I'm losing a lot, if I'm winning a lot, because I really enjoy, the learning aspect and, practicing and getting better, and just the general gameplay of these types of games. And I generally found, like, I don't know about you, but when we were playing, and I couldn't tell if this was just because we were doing this for the show and we had to play the game. But I basically always felt like I can keep playing this game with you for a few hours and not get bored. Like today, we played for like 2.5, 2 hours.
We've played for 2 hours most nights over the past fortnight.
Yeah, and like we'd stop playing because it was getting late, basically. Like we'd
Mm.
just keep playing. I never throughout this 2 weeks felt like I was forcing myself to play just because we had to. Like I was always happy to play more of this game, because I think it does a really good job of having like solid fundamentals, and just good design that carries it really well. So like for me personally, I had a blast playing Street Fighter 2 over the past 2 weeks. Like even though I don't love any of the characters, the core gameplay mechanics, of fighting games and of this game are so solid that doesn't matter too much to me.
I really enjoyed Street Fighter 2. I had my complaints about it earlier in the piece, and I think that those complaints still stand to some degree. Like, but I've kind of accepted that they're just an intrinsic part of the fighting genre, and I think that Street Fighter 2 gets it right in all the ways that matter to me. It's got a wide, varied cast. It's got this emphasis on mind games and not on combos, although I'm sure as you get better and better, combos become more important. But at least at the level I'm playing at, it feels less combo heavy. I think that you have a wide variety of tools at your disposal, and you've got the ability to get out of any cheesing that the opponent is doing to you. I just had a lot of fun, and I think that this was the best step up from Fantasy Strike that I could have had. I mean, I played a modern Street Fighter clone that basically took all the difficult parts up. This introduced elements like more attacks and high and low blocking and these specials. And I think that the learning curve I had was like I enjoyed the learning experience overall. I'm very interested to see what's next for me in terms of fighting games, because honestly, there's still a lot of aspects of fighting games that turn me off. But I'm eager to try another one. Like I've had a good escalation experience, so I think we could try another one, James, that I'd really enjoy it. Yeah, I've had a good time with Street Fighter 2. This isn't like, oh, I've had a horrible time and I'm not looking forward to the next fighting game we do. I want to experience more. I want to widen my palette so I can better get a handle on what's going on.
Yeah, I'm thinking for the next one because I enjoyed doing this multiplayer game this past fortnight. I'd like to do more. I'd like to do more with, more community involvement too. It was really fun. So I was thinking about this, and because like clearly I guess the motion inputs are like the main sticking point for you.
Well, yeah, the problem is I don't have the patience to grind it out. That's what it boils down to. Like
Hmm.
there are games like competitive games I've played competitively where Counter Strike's a big one where I have learned smoke lineups. You crouch in this corner, you poke at this cloud, and I've memorized 5 of them on a map so that my team can do various smoke executes. Like I've done that before, but I just don't have the patience to learn it for a fighting game we're playing for the podcast. It's just not a fun thing to do if you're playing casually, I guess.
Yeah, so I'm considering what we do for the next one. I think we will pick another game in a different series to do for the next fighter. I'm thinking Soul Calibur might be what we go for because I guess you haven't played a 3D fighter, and that game is just all direction plus button for all of the moves. I think you'll appreciate that. It's also like a weapon fighter, so instead of having characters just having their fists, it's more about the weapon they're holding and the fighting style that weapon has.
That sounds interesting.
Yeah, so I think we can try something like that, but we'll find out. It probably won't be for at least a few months, maybe probably longer.
But yeah, overall, James, like, yeah, Street Fighter 2 was great. I enjoyed it a lot, and I like even just playing today. It was just a lot of fun playing the different matchups and executing my game plan. So yeah, it's a good game. I recommend it. I do wonder if a person with literally no fighting experience, would I recommend Street Fighter 2 to them? No, play Fantasy Strike. Like, honest to God, if you have no experience and you play even Street Fighter 2, you're just going to be overwhelmed. There's just too much going on, and it demands a level of like reaction time, which I think is too high. So I think play something simpler to help ramp you up to these fighters.
I imagine most people who are into fighting games didn't play Fantasy Strike first, Patrick. Although I will say there is a certain kind of person that will like fighters. The kind of person with a lot of perseverance, basically.
Well, the thing is, James, if we're talking like when you consider Street Fighter 2 has like no training mode or anything. It seems like a really hard sell for a person's first fighting game.
Yeah, I also agree that I don't think Street Fighter 2 is the best place to start. Like, I would definitely, like, even say start with, like, 5 before. Like,
sure.
those games have, like, the inputs are easy. There's more stuff going on, but they have better training modes, that kind of thing. I know a lot of people who started when Strive came out, Guilty Gear, it was their first one, and they really enjoyed that. I know you saw you saw all the complexity.
Yeah, you showed me like there is this thing called a Roman cancel, and there's 4 versions, and it seems like there's so much going. I don't know how you could. I just stare at the keyboard. Like I don't know how you can play that game with any kind of deliberate intent as a new player. That seems crazy to me.
Yeah, but I know a heap of people who started off just playing that game, and they obviously when you start you don't use all the mechanics, right?
Yeah, it makes me feel sick.
But also, like, when you play against other new players, they also don't use all the mechanics, so
it feels too random then. Like it's just you're just pressing buttons at random. I don't know, sorry. I know I'm very particular about this. I just like even a game like Dota, which I would say has a similar sort of like hold on, let me explain. Like, Dota is crazy complicated, right? There's heaps and heaps going on. But you can go to a lane and you can get last hits, or try to.
Yeah, sure. You can also just, attack and block, right? Like,
I guess.
It's not like your opponent is using scissors and you don't know to use rock against it. It's like it's just another move, even if it's another mechanic, right? Like,
yeah, I think the thing that throws me off is that fighting games are so fast-paced, right? Like, they're crazy fast-paced, and there's also a lot of complexity. Most games have either complexity or they're fast-paced. Like, a game like Fury or Hotline Miami or whatever, they're very fast-paced games, but they're simple. Fighting games have both intertwined.
I mean, the speed, like, obviously new players don't play as fast as they should, right? Like, people don't know how to be aggressive very well when they start, and you get matched up against players of your skill level, so you'll both be playing pretty slowly. So I think you're underestimating how bad it is, like, for a new player to jump in and then be matched with other new players.
It's kind of similar to playing how I feel playing StarCraft 2 when I tried to play that competitively. It was just a mess. I felt it felt like a train wreck because there was so much going on and I was doing a fraction of what I was meant to do. So even winning didn't feel good.
I would say that the best time to get into fighting games, if you're not into one already, is to buy one on launch when it first comes out, if it looks cool to you, because then everyone will be struggling to learn the mechanics, right?
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point.
Yeah, because that's what happened when me and my friends and my other friends played Guilty Gear. We played it when it came out, when everyone sucked. And then, when I jump back in now after a month break and everyone has kept playing except me, I do notice, those few months missing of time elapsed. I think the best thing to do is just to have another friend and both, just choose a game that looks cool. You're both going to be, struggling. But if you're struggling together, it's not going to be as brutal, right?
Yeah, I agree. If you've got a friend to play with, it's not as bad. Oh, yeah, that about sums it up, I think, James.
Actually, there's one more slight point that we didn't touch on, but I want to touch on briefly because we mentioned this out loud a number of times. This game visually still looks great, I think.
Completely agree. Gorgeous, great use of colors.
Yeah, the animated backgrounds. When we swapped from regular turbo to super turbo, Grandmaster Challenge, we were like both blown away. I think this game looks fantastic today still. It's gorgeous. And yeah, that's my last point.
Yeah, the characters have a great sense of personality. They all feel extremely distinct, and you get a really good idea of all the different fighting styles based on the animations. Yeah, completely agree. Okay, now that we're all finally finished, Jesus Christ.
Go on.
Thank you, everyone, to listen to us talk about Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo, Grandmaster Challenge, whatever it is. To all the people who are experienced in fighting games, I hope I haven't triggered you too much, but if I have, deal with it. James and I make up the Retrospectives podcast. Each and every fortnight, we play and review these classic games of the past. You can find all of our content on our website, which is rspodcast.net. It's got links to every one of our episodes, as well as a bunch of articles that James and I have written about old games and new. It's also got links to all of our social media stuff. The most important one is our Discord server. Our Discord server is where we have most of our community interaction, and we would love if you would drop by. We used it to organize and have some games of Street Fighter 2 this fortnight, and we'll be using it again in the future. So if you want to recommend us a game or criticize our takes or just sign up for the next game that we're playing multiplayer, please do drop on by. So James, we're heading up to Christmas, and although normally I would be picking a game this fortnight, we're going to be doing something different in the third annual mailbag episode, one which I'm very excited for.
Yeah, it's been a while since we've done one of these. I always kind of like these episodes because it means I get to spend an extra 20 hours playing a game of my choosing instead of playing a game that Patrick has chosen to spite me.
Yeah, no, it's we've gotten a bunch of new listeners in this past year, and I'm very excited to answer some questions. So we encourage you. You can ask us on Twitter, or probably the easiest way is to join our Discord server, and you can just ask a question in there. We'll answer as many questions as we can. These are kind of fun, kick back, get a drink, and just chat about old games and new games. So please ask us anything. It's always a blast. All right, so yeah, we'll see you in a fortnight. Please do send us all the questions you have.
See you then, guys.